The moment the Plaza Accord was signed, the world didn't hear an explosion, but it should have. Because that quiet meeting inside the Plaza Hotel in New York didn't just adjust currencies. It detonated a chain reaction that would haunt Japan for decades. A financial weapon disguised as diplomacy. Before we dive in, subscribe. This story will change the way you look at global power forever. The early 1980s were a pressure cooker. America was bleeding jobs, factories were closing, and the dollar was becoming too strong, killing exports and turning entire industrial towns into ghosts. Meanwhile, across the Pacific, Japan's rise was relentless. Their cars, chips, and electronics were flooding the world. Their companies were outcompeting everyone. Their trade surplus towered over Washington like a quiet threat. Every headline asked the same question: is Japan taking over the world? Behind the scenes, U.S. officials felt cornered. They believed Japan's currency was artificially weak, making their exports unfairly cheap. But Washington couldn't publicly admit it was losing control. So the White House, the Treasury, and the major central banks began plotting something drastic: a coordinated attack on the dollar itself. Not with troops or tanks, but with agreements, pressure, and a velvet glove hiding an iron fist. Japan didn't want this. Their economy relied on exports. Their companies relied on a stable yen. Their financial system wasn't prepared for shock therapy. But for the United States, this was about survival, about restoring dominance. And when America needs something, the negotiation is never equal, even when 5 countries sit at the same table. Picture the scene. September 22, 1985. 5 finance ministers, a luxury hotel, thick carpets, quiet hallways, and a decision that would rewrite economic history. They agreed to push the dollar down and force the yen up. Hard, fast, violently. Within months, the yen didn't just rise, it skyrocketed. Japan's currency nearly doubled in value. For an export nation, that's like suffocating oxygen overnight. Factories panicked. CEOs choked. Policymakers in Tokyo were stunned. They didn't have a playbook for this. And in that moment of fear, the Bank of Japan made the move that would doom an entire generation. It slashed interest rates to the floor. Money flooded the economy so fast it became intoxicating. Tokyo turned into a casino. Land prices exploded. Stocks soared. Credit felt infinite. People bought buildings like lottery tickets. The Nikkei hovered near 40,000 points, the kind of number that makes economists sweat. But underneath the euphoria, something was breaking. The bubble wasn't a side effect, it was a survival mechanism. Japan was drowning under a currency it never wanted, trying to inflate away the pain. And America? Calm, confident, watching quietly as its manufacturing advantage slowly returned. The Plaza Accord wasn't just economic policy. It was power, pure, strategic, geopolitical power. Japan thought it was cooperating. America knew it was winning. The world saw the Plaza Accord as diplomacy. Japan saw it as pressure. But inside Washington, the conversation was blunter. The United States would not allow its industries to die quietly while Japan surged ahead. By the early 1980s, America's car factories were closing. Steel towns were collapsing. Malls were filling with Japanese electronics, Japanese televisions, Japanese semiconductors. Politicians called it an invasion. Economists called it imbalance. But to the voters, it felt like humiliation. Japan had become the world's most efficient exporter, and the yen was the engine behind its rise. An undervalued yen meant Japanese products were always cheaper abroad, and Japanese firms could outbid almost anyone. American officials understood this. They also understood something else. The global monetary system was not as free as textbooks claimed. Power mattered, pressure mattered, and the U.S. still commanded the financial stage. When negotiators from the U.S., Japan, Germany, France, and the U.K. arrived at the Plaza Hotel in New York in September 1985, the agreement they drafted was cloaked in diplomatic language. But the intent was unmistakable: force the dollar down, force the yen up, and force Japan to absorb the shock. The moment the accord was announced, the currency markets moved like a living organism sensing blood. The yen surged. Investors scrambled. Traders panicked. And inside Tokyo boardrooms, executives stared at their screens in disbelief. Their advantage, the stable, weak yen, was gone. Overnight, the Bank of Japan found itself in an impossible corner. A strong yen meant exports would suffer. Factories would lose orders. Growth would stall. Politicians demanded a response. The central bank delivered one. It cut interest rates again and again, pouring liquidity into the financial system like water into a cracked dam. Money became cheap. Credit became almost free. Banks begged people to borrow. Real estate prices soared so fast that young families stopped asking, "Can we buy a home?" and began asking, "Can we afford to wait?" Tokyo's skyline turned into a monument of speculation. Land around the Imperial Palace was said to be worth more than all of California. Golf club memberships were traded like blue-chip stocks. Housewives became day traders. Salarymen bought second homes. A generation began to believe that asset prices could only move one way, up. Japan looked unstoppable, but underneath the euphoria, something fragile was forming. The Bank of Japan's cheap money wasn't fueling productivity. It was fueling fantasies. Loans were backed by collateral whose value existed only on paper. Companies borrowed not to innovate, but to bid on more real estate. The stock market rose not because earnings were strong, but because the credit spigot was wide open. The system had become a balloon, shiny, enormous, and weightless. All because the Plaza Accord forced Japan to chase growth through money instead of competitiveness. The United States got what it wanted: a weaker dollar, a rebalanced trade dynamic, a temporary easing of political pressure. But Japan paid the bill. And as the 1980s faded into the 1990s, the bill came due at full price. When the bubble finally burst, it didn't pop. It collapsed silently, like a building whose foundations had been hollowed out. Stock prices slid. Real estate values disintegrated. Banks were left holding bad loans the way a drowning man clings to dead weight. And the country that had seemed poised to overtake the United States now struggled to keep its head above water. The Plaza Accord had triggered a chain reaction: currency shock, policy panic, easy money, asset bubble, collapse that would define Japan's destiny for decades. Economists later gave it a name: the lost decades. But inside Japan, it felt more personal. Citizens watched their savings evaporate. Businesses shut their doors. A generation lost faith in risk. The once energetic nation became cautious, aging, hesitant, afraid to dream too loudly. Yet the most chilling part isn't Japan's story. It's the way the world quietly copied it. Japan hadn't just revalued its currency. It had surrendered its greatest competitive weapon. And almost immediately, the cracks began to appear. Export numbers softened. Factories slowed. Executives who had spent years celebrating endless demand suddenly found themselves staring into a future they didn't recognize. The United States congratulated itself. Europe breathed easier. But inside Tokyo's ministries, panic was beginning to rise. They could not allow Japan's economic miracle to stall. Not after decades of national sacrifice, disciplined savings, and social cohesion. Japan had rebuilt itself from ashes into an industrial titan. And now, with one signature, that power was slipping. So the Bank of Japan turned to the one tool they still controlled: interest rates. If a strong yen made exports weaker, then cheap money would make everything else roar. Loans, mortgages, speculation, all of it. The plan wasn't elegant, but it was fast. And in those days, speed mattered more than caution. Money poured into the economy like a flood. Banks were told, discreetly, to lend. Corporations were encouraged to borrow. Ordinary citizens were pushed, indirectly but unmistakably, to believe that property was guaranteed to rise, that stocks were destiny, that Japan's wealth had only one direction: upward. Tokyo transformed almost overnight. Land prices rose so fast that neighborhoods changed value between sunrise and sunset. A tiny piece of real estate in the Ginza district became worth more than entire American cities. Companies measured their worth not by what they produced, but by the land their headquarters sat on. College students traded stocks between classes. Housewives speculated on futures. It was as if the entire nation was being lifted by an invisible hand. Weightless, invincible, unstoppable. The world watched in awe. Economists in New York and London whispered that Japan would soon buy everything: Hollywood studios, Manhattan skyscrapers, global conglomerates. And Japan did buy them. They bought icons, trophies, proofs of success. But underneath the euphoria was a silence nobody wanted to acknowledge. The silence of a bubble expanding beyond reason, beyond control, beyond gravity. And every bubble, no matter how beautiful, is just air pretending to be wealth. By the end of the 1980s, Japan had become the richest mirage in human history. The illusion held until the day it didn't. The collapse began quietly. A few failed loans, a stalled land deal, a hesitant stock market. But bubbles never burst gently, they implode. Prices didn't fall, they cratered. Banks didn't lose money, they drowned in it. The same households that once believed wealth was guaranteed watched their savings evaporate. Lifetimes of discipline vanished into thin air. The Bank of Japan, terrified and humiliated, tried to fix the disaster they helped create. They slashed rates again, then all the way down to nearly zero. But it was too late. The bubble had swallowed the future before it died. And that was the beginning of Japan's lost decades. An economy once envied by the world became a study in stagnation. Growth flatlined. Wages froze. The stock market never returned to its old glory. Entire generations grew up without knowing what economic optimism felt like. Japan had been coerced into a revaluation and then pushed into the single largest asset bubble the modern world had ever seen. The Plaza Accord wasn't just a currency agreement. It was the spark that rewired Japan's destiny. Japan didn't realize it yet, but the Plaza Accord had set off a fuse buried deep beneath its own economy. The yen kept climbing through 1986, then 1987, rising faster than exporters could adjust, faster than companies could reprice contracts, faster than factories could rework supply chains. Every month, the currency tightened around Japan's industrial machine like an invisible hand choking its breath. Executives in Osaka and Yokohama watched their margins evaporate in real time. Factories that had been printing money in 1984 were suddenly bleeding red ink. Contracts with American buyers collapsed. Automakers panicked, electronics giants stalled, and even the mighty keiretsu networks, once invincible, began to tremble. Japan needed relief, and it needed it fast. The Bank of Japan stepped in like a firefighter confronted with a burning building. Except it didn't use water. It used gasoline. Interest rates were slashed again and again. Liquidity poured into the system until it overflowed, and credit became so cheap that speculation wasn't just easy, it was irresistible. Land in Tokyo wasn't valued anymore. It was worshipped. Real estate near the Imperial Palace became more expensive than all of California. Teenagers were day trading stocks in between cram school classes. Banks lent money on collateral that didn't exist, and companies borrowed because everyone was borrowing. What began as a currency adjustment transformed into something monstrous, a bubble so enormous it distorted the psychology of an entire nation. People believed Japan had discovered a new economic model, a formula for permanent wealth. Houses weren't homes, they were investment missiles aimed at the stratosphere. Stocks weren't markets, they were staircases to heaven. And the policymakers who engineered it all convinced themselves they were steering history. But bubbles don't ask for permission when they burst. They simply burst. By 1989, cracks appeared. At first, no one noticed. A missed loan here, a stalled purchase there. But the cracks multiplied. Investors started selling. Buyers hesitated. The Bank of Japan, terrified of losing control, tapped the brakes too late. And then the ground fell away. Land prices collapsed. Stocks plunged 50%, then 60%, then 70%. Companies that had been national champions suddenly couldn't roll over their debt. Banks hid losses in labyrinths of accounting illusions. Families who thought they were wealthy woke up bankrupt. Japan's economy didn't crash dramatically. It sank, slowly, painfully, like a great ship filling with water compartment by compartment. The lost decades had begun, but back then no one called them that. People simply kept waiting for the recovery that never came. Year after year, Japan sat in a fog of deflation, falling wages, demographic decline, and a confidence so shattered that even free money couldn't rebuild it. And behind all of it was a quiet truth. Japan hadn't jumped into this disaster. It had been pushed. America achieved what it wanted: a weaker dollar, stronger exports, revived competitiveness, but Japan paid with its future. And the rest of the world learned a dangerous lesson. Currency cooperation is never neutral. Someone always pays the price. The Plaza Accord wasn't just an agreement. It was a warning disguised as diplomacy, a reminder that global finance is not a fair arena. It is a terrain shaped by power, leverage, and fear. Japan became the test case for what happens when a nation allows its currency, the heartbeat of its economy, to be renegotiated at a foreign table. And the most chilling part? Today's world looks disturbingly familiar. The Plaza Accord didn't just realign currencies. It realigned destinies. Because once Japan lifted the yen, once it allowed its currency to strengthen so violently in such a short span, it accidentally rewired the psychology of an entire nation. Factories that were once the pride of Osaka and Nagoya suddenly watched their profit margins evaporate. American managers who had feared Japanese dominance just months earlier suddenly found themselves celebrating victory in boardrooms. Exporters who had spent 2 decades mastering efficiency now woke up to a world where price, something they could no longer control, became their new enemy. Inside Japan, the shock was immediate and disorienting. The yen wasn't just strong, it was too strong. The shift happened too fast, too violently, too politically, and in Tokyo, policymakers panicked. The Bank of Japan made a choice that would define a generation. If the currency couldn't be weakened, then the economy would be inflated. Interest rates plunged. Liquidity flooded in. Money, cheap, abundant, intoxicating, poured into every corner of the financial system. Real estate became a speculative obsession, stocks exploded in valuation, and banks became engines of reckless optimism. Japan's asset bubble didn't grow, it metastasized. Land in Tokyo's Ginza district became worth more than entire American cities. The Imperial Palace grounds were valued higher than all of California. Investors believed that prosperity could be manufactured, engineered, printed into existence. But beneath the surface, an invisible timer was ticking. Every speculative mania eventually meets gravity. And Japan's gravity arrived in the early 1990s, swift, merciless, and unforgettable. The bubble burst not like a pop, but like a collapse. A slow-motion implosion that took years to unfold and decades to recover from. Japan's lost decade was just the beginning. Growth vanished, wages froze, birth rates fell, and a nation that once believed it would dominate the future became trapped in a permanent economic winter. And here's the chilling part that almost nobody talks about. Japan didn't fall because it mismanaged its own success. Japan fell because it obeyed. It followed the rules. It honored the agreement. It played the game the way the United States demanded. The Plaza Accord was supposed to fix imbalances. Instead, it rerouted the world's largest export powerhouse into a dead end. And once the consequences became undeniable, the countries behind the accord quietly stepped back and moved on, while Japan was left to deal with the aftermath alone. Even today, the shadows of the Plaza Accord stretch across Japan's economy like cold, unmoving fog. Ultra-low interest rates, massive government debt, an aging population with no demographic escape, a currency haunted by its own past. Japan never truly recovered, not because it couldn't innovate, but because the psychological wound never healed. But here's the twist the world wasn't ready for. What happened to Japan is now happening everywhere else. The same tools of financial engineering, forced currency changes, artificially low interest rates, stimulus-driven booms, debt-fueled asset bubbles, are now global policy. The United States, Europe, China, no one is exempt. The Plaza Accord was not a one-time event. It was a blueprint for how powerful nations manipulate money, pressure allies, and rewrite economic destinies when it suits them. A blueprint for how currency diplomacy can become economic warfare wrapped in diplomatic smiles. A blueprint for how entire societies can be steered into long-term stagnation with just a few signatures behind closed doors. And now the world is watching the same pattern unfold again, this time on a global scale, with stakes far beyond Japan's bubble. In the end, Japan didn't fall because of one agreement, one meeting, or one diplomatic handshake in a luxury New York hotel. It fell because the Plaza Accord forced a nation built on precision, discipline, and export strength into an economic identity it wasn't designed for. The yen soared, the bubble swelled, and when it burst, the shockwave didn't just destroy balance sheets. It rewired Japan's entire future. Factories emptied, wages froze, families learned to live with shrinking expectations. An entire generation grew up in an economy where growth was something their parents talked about the way people talk about a past life. The Plaza Accord didn't just revalue a currency, it revalued a society's confidence. And the deepest irony is that Japan's collapse became a warning label that nobody else bothered to read. Today, the same formula: easy money, manipulated currencies, political pressure disguised as cooperation, and crises delayed instead of solved, echoes through every major economy. The United States, Europe, China, all walking the same tightrope Japan fell from nearly 4 decades ago. The Plaza Accord is not a historical event. It's a mirror held up to the present, and the reflection is uncomfortable. If you want more documentaries that expose the hidden machinery of global money and the decisions that still shape our lives today, subscribe. The next story lifts the curtain even higher.